Hello. My name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books Podcast, episode number 194. So I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction to the edition of the book we are going to read today. And well, I want to make some points that are from this particular introduction that I think are relevant for our conversation today. This book that we're going to cover today is the culminating work of the author's long career. It was published in 1862 when the author was 60. An instant success with the public, the book has stood since then as a masterpiece of fiction, both for the emotional intensity of its dramatic story and for a richness that defies any simple description. Undoubtedly, readers come to the book for the deeply engrossing characters and stay on, as the author himself predicted, for the wider social and historic panorama. The political timing of the publication of this book was auspicious, isolated by exile from the empire of Napoleon III, whose authoritarianism was relaxing as his effectiveness and popularity were waning. The author found a ready audience for his politically progressive fervor. Despite his long list of works in poetry, fiction, and drama, the author had been most widely known before this novel as a public figure, defender of the national conscience. And now, homesick for his home country, but unwilling to accept the amnesty offered by the emperor he despised, he was eager for a chance to remind his home country of his presence. A friend reported to him that all of the people in the major city that this book is focused on were raving about the book during its publication. As for the critics, the author clearly took it as a compliment that his liberal views had enraged the reactionary, the conservative Catholic, and the Bonapartist journals. The gratifying enthusiasm of the younger critics, however, was not unanimously sustained, for the book had appeared outside of its time. When he began writing it in 1845, the romantic traditions of intense sentiment and crusading idealism were prevalent. And I'm going to skip down a little bit. And yet, rising above the fluctuations of literary criticism, the book has always retained a powerful hold on the public, and writers have continued to turn to this author and this book for inspiration. Diverse authors such as Arthur Rimbaud, Stéphane Mallarmé, and Paul Claudel were influenced by this giant of romanticism. André Gide called him the greatest master of images and sonorities, of symbols and language forms in all of French literature. Close quote. As for me, today on the show, my interaction with this book is very interesting. My engagement with this book is very interesting. And, the reality is that my engagement with the books and the topics that we cover on this show covers and ranges all over the place, right? Sometimes I've seen the movie, right, that the books that we are covering come from. Sometimes I've been to the theater show, and sometimes I've even watched a trailer for the movie based on the book before even reading the book. And sometimes I come to some books virginally. I have no previous knowledge of the author, the book, or even any derivative works generated from the book. And this is how most people are these days, and how most people have approached books through the long 20th century. From movies to musicals, the book we are covering today has never been out of print since it was originally published in 1862, which it stands alongside another book that we covered last episode, Ben-Hur, as never being out of print. It has inspired people to act in ways that they never would have before, and it meets criteria in that it activates readers, it inspires conversations, and it generates a need for action from folks. And the author, who we'll talk about in a little bit and who was just mentioned there in the introduction, I suspect, probably did all of this intentionally. Today, we are going to begin our conversation about a massive book, and we're going to try to glean what we can from it and apply it to our real lives. This book lies at the headwaters of the most popular and highest grossing stage musicals of all time. It has been turned into movies. It has been turned into a television show. It's been everywhere. And again, this book has never been out of print. Its original publication in 1862. Today, we're going to be covering, there we go, Victor Hugo's Les Misérables. Leaders, let us take to the barricades. The only thing we have to lose is our cowardice. And joining me on this journey today and back for the first time this season is our co-host, who's a little jet lagged, and she's joining us from her vacation at an undisclosed location, which will remain undisclosed, but she is jet lagged, folks. Libby Unger. How are you doing today, Libby?
Good. Bonjour. Jesan.
Well, let's let's go ahead. Let's get into it. So, talk to us about this book. Talk to us about the impact of this book. Talk to us about what this book means for you, and means to you. You have a lot of familiarity with this book. You go to France. You are native. You're not native, but you're a French speaker. Talk to us about this book. What does this book mean to Libby Unger?
Your introduction and discussing, how you come about, books in particular, until like rereading this and preparing for it. Um, it was more the stage version of Les Miserables and the
Mm-hmm.
soundtrack to it. And going back to the revolutionary times, of France and such, that appeal, the artistic appeal was embedded young around this book
Mm-hmm.
and the value in it. And then um uh, semi-awareness of the French history. But it wasn't until I started preparing for this in detail and the questions you teed up around made me really think more about like the history of France, from their revolution to their final, to the current republic. I mean, I really was unaware of the
Mm-hmm.
detail and how fraught with wars, France was. Um, you know, the two different monarchs that Hugo dealt with,
Mm-hmm.
plus the two different Napoleonic regimes. Honestly, I just had broad strokes of a French Revolution and Napoleon and a king and a few of those, but not the details um and that each generation, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that was born, 1790 on was fraught with a war. For the
Mm-hmm.
monarch to to get back in power, Napoleon back monarch Napoleon, and then you finally get the republic that was somewhat modeled after the US. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the topics that you've teed up to start talking about the heroism and the moral, um, the characters that bring up different moral um, issues for us to be concerned about, as well as models for us to think about. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
excited for it. I don't know. Did you
Well,
have the same? Did you have the same aha with respect to history? I know you're more of a history buff.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a great question. Yes, I did. So one of the big things that kind of jumps out to you at the beginning of Les Mis is, and I'm going to kind of shorten it here when I refer to the book, but
Yep.
one of the big things that jumps out to you about this book right from the get-go is how much of a handle Victor Hugo has on, to your point, French history. Like he has a
Hmm.
handle on exactly the path of development, right? Because he's surrounded by it, right? He's surrounded by people who remembered Napoleon, who remembered that history. And so those stories and that lived history from probably would have been parents and grandparents for Hugo, and people in his neighborhoods and in his communities. That's one of the very first things that jumps off the page to you as you read Les Mis. The other thing is you begin to realize, and this is really what came home for me, just how scared everybody else of the European continent was of France at that time. Um, and it's easy to kind of, not easy, as an American, and this is, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence this year. We will be talking about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution with our DeRollo Nixon. That's going to be coming out on July 1st, ahead of July 4th, and I will have some very specific things to say about our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence at 250. But it's easy to be sort of, as an American, to kind of look at the French Revolution, kind of like Thomas Jefferson did, and either fall in love with it and then wonder at its excesses at the end, the Reign of Terror and all of that, or to take the view that the British did, which was at the time, you keep that crap over there. We don't want to hear. You keep it across the channel, and don't you dare come over here. We'll come over there and deal with you all. Right. That's how. Right. Which they did. Exactly.
Yeah.
But don't you dare bring that garbage over here. Don't you run that up here. And so it's easy to take either the American perspective or the British perspective, but to absolutely understand from a European continental perspective how powerful that revolution was and how much it rattled the cages of everybody on that continent, that jumps off to you. That jumps off the pages to you of Les Misérables, because Hugo knew, he understood all of this. And it's fascinating to sort of realize that the potential, I think, the potential in the next 25 years for the French to run that continent again is right there. It's right there. The English aren't going to do it. The Germans have been denatured. And who else is there? The Spanish are never, they're never been interested in running the continent. They've just never been interested in being in charge. And the Italians, God bless them, they don't have it in them. So who's left? Well, it's the French. And so it's going to be interesting to watch, I think, over the next 25 years, some of that not fear, but some of that yeah, well, I guess maybe fear is a good word. Some of that fear will, I think, begin to drip back into folks on the continent. I don't know if I have a good hold on this, but it was something that definitely jogged in my brain reading Les Mis, reading this book.
It as you see some of the European trends, they've been trying to infiltrate the US over the last, couple of decades or more.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had a full appreciation for the empiric nature of the French
Mm-hmm.
Until just going into greater detail about those 100 years, 1780s to 1880s. And then seeing the history over the last couple of decades, the more liberal, progressive thinking that's coming from Europe entering
Mm-hmm.
entering our ways, and it does make me think that they're almost like the Chinese to some degree, that they have a
Yep.
long-term perspective of where they sit in history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it is interesting. Economic security is one of the key themes that I see as to how you gain power,
Mm-hmm.
or you fight off invading resources through economic security. and that when there's economic instability, that's when the monarchs and dictatorships, come in, and uh, someone who has a long view of history knows that if they create insecurity, that creates room for that new leadership to come in. And now that it sounds, if you were living back in the times of the Middle Ages and the Revolution and the Enlightenment, etc., that's not far-fetched to think about because
Mhm.
poverty and economic insecurity was the way of the world.
Correct.
It
Right.
wasn't
Exactly.
until industrialization and the US kind of dominated around, and creating economically independent and viable um, industries and countries that we stopped seeing war being so prominent.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting that over the last 15 or 20 years, divisiveness and trying to create economic instability is being introduced into what was a stable system. And you have to wonder if it's being done intentionally, because that's the only way that empires can take back their power.
Well, and well, let me, there's several things you brought up there, and I want to hit on
Yeah,
all of them. And I think Les Mis hits on all of them.
they do.
Let me
Yeah.
go back and start. Oh my gosh, this book hits on all of it. And the poverty piece is one of the other things that really jumped out to me, but I want
Yeah.
to keep my powder dry on that for just a second, because that's, I think,
Yep.
critical to understanding this book. So,
I agree.
yeah. So Victor Hugo, right? Let's talk a little about him. So he was just like the author of Ben-Hur, Lew Wallace. He was a romantic writer, capital R romanticist. And there was something that occurred to me um actually on Saturday, which I'll talk about a little bit. But he was we in our post World War II consensus, we don't understand what the power of romanticism, and we don't understand anymore sort of how that deeply impacted authors such as Hugo and Lew Wallace. He was born in 1802, so talk about, the revolution literally occurred, like the French Revolution literally occurred like what, 10, 15 years before he was born. So he was born in 1802. He died in 1885. He was a giant of French letters. Not only did he write Les Mis, he also wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which, the publication of that book actually encouraged the French to restore that cathedral because it became such a tourist magnet. He wrote poetry, he wrote essays, he was a playwright, he was a journalist, he was a politician, and he was a human rights activist. Now, when we talk about human rights activism, I don't want the listeners to think of this in terms of the kind of human rights activism that we see in our time. This wasn't uh, cynical activism on Hugo's part. He wasn't trying to grift or hustle. He actually believed that, just like folks coming out of the French Revolution believed, that you could remake the world. You could actually have utopia on Earth, and that it was within human beings' hands in in the 19th century to be able to do that. He genuinely believed that, and that came about because of his romanticism. Um, he wrote plays like Cromwell and dramas Hernani. He produced more than, I didn't know this until I went and looked at his Wikipedia profile, but he produced more than 4,000 drawings in his lifetime, and was an abolitionist around slavery and around capital punishment. There have been accusations of racism thrown at Hugo, but they don't stick, because he actually like moved his position around on a lot of things, in particular in relation to the French shenanigans in Algeria, and in northern Africa during his time. And I'm just going to quote directly from here. His opposition to absolutism and his literary stature established him as a national hero. Hugo died on the 22nd of May in 1885, aged 83. He was given a state funeral in the Pantheon of Paris, which was attended by over 2 million people. That's ridiculous. 2 million people showed up for a writer. Hemingway,
At
eat
that
your heart out.
time, at that time, which 2 million people, the population was what?
Yeah,
In Paris, right?
yeah,
Significant.
significant. The dude was just, he breathed hard and like the French moved. Um, you'll never see a guy like that ever again in letters. That won't ever happen again. Like the twilight of the writer started occurring at the end of the 20th century. And the sun, I won't say the sun is set on the writer, um, but the kind of discussions we're having right now around writing and around the art of writing, one of the things I've postulated on the show about the death of the novel, I do actually think the novel's dead. I actually do. I don't think writing's dead. I don't think the book is dead, but I think the novel as a thing that a book delivers is dead. I think that's DOA now because you can do so many other different things. You can go watch the book or see the streaming show, or nowadays dump the thing into the AI and generate something that looks just as good. And so the novel, the fictionalized account that draws emotions from people, and drives them to action, the kind of thing that Hugo loved and was romantic about.
But
You know,
I kept thinking about Hegel,
yeah,
reading
okay,
about Hugo, and it's similar from both from a writing perspective. I know Hegel was not a fiction writer, but poet, political.
mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
both recognized what motivates humanity, and
Yeah,
what demoralizes humanity. And that was what was coming through from a Hugo perspective, is his own ability to evolve and then sacrifice, for what he knew was right. That's what Les Mis is all about with the different characters, is about the power of redemption and doing what's right. Um, uh, just at a human level, even if it
mm-hmm.
may cost you power and prestige. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but what I really loved is the whole story is about redemption.
mm-hmm.
Um, and if you believe in someone and you tell them that they can redeem, like the bishop did, right, that the right soul, the right person will receive that and say, I need to pay it forward and do the right thing. Um, and that is a reflection, I think, of Hugo's belief in the redemptive, in the evolution and redemptive ability of a human.
Yeah,
Hegel's kind of that way too,
mm-hmm.
from a self-evolution perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to see people, or I know I'm inspired by those who choose do the hard thing because it's the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what populist movements will come behind. Um,
Yeah, and that the characters in Les Mis, are
yeah.
fully formed people. They're not, even Javert, even the villain, right, is a fully formed human being.
Yep.
He's not
Yep.
a one-dimensional avatar standing in for something else. And this is another reason I say the novel is probably not probably is if not dead, on life support, because we don't have writers who see people as fully formed, multidimensional individuals running around in the world. Instead, writers
Not
are
now. That's why
using,
we have to go back to the Mark Andreessen philosophy is I don't read anything recent. I read what's endured. But the piece I finally realized like what it was about both Hegel and Hugo that resonated with me in particular is they kept trying to believe the institutions meant what
Mhm.
they said, right? Like
Yes.
Hugo first believed in the monarch and was willing to take compensation for his riding with the monarch, and then the monarch disappoints. And so then he's pro Napoleon and believes Napoleon's going to do the right thing for the French. And then he's disappointed, and he
Hmm.
tries to put his, belief again into those big institutions. They all fail him, which we all, if you're awake at all, you realize the institutions are for the betterment of the institutions and not the individual. And so you ultimately need to go within and say, what is the right thing to do from a moral perspective and live
Hmm.
that way. That's what Hegel did. That's what Hugo's message was. And me, that's
Yeah.
my message from a leadership perspective as well.
Well, and I think so to your point, like I said I was having a conversation today with somebody else, business conversation, and one of the points that I made to him is that we used to have people, and it applies here, we used to have people who spoke with and led with moral authority.
Right.
We talked a little bit about this on our Malcolm X episode, probably a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now. One of the fascinating things about Malcolm X is you could disagree with where his morals came from, but he had moral authority. He spoke with
Hmm.
moral authority.
Hmm.
Um, Mattie Ross, the character in the Charles Portis book True Grit, you know, if you watch the Joel and Ethan Cohen remake of True Grit, the way that character is portrayed in there is a lot closer to the Mattie Ross of the book than in the John Wayne movie, right? The John Wayne Mattie Ross. But the girl in the John Wayne version and the girl in the Joel and Ethan Cohen version, Mattie, both of them have rock ribbed morality. They speak with moral authority, right? They act with moral authority. Malcolm X acted with
Walk their
moral.
talk.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Malcolm X, spoke with moral authority. Mattie Ross speaks with and was written as a character with moral authority. And Victor Hugo, to your point here, Victor Hugo wrote as a romanticist who was in love with, to your point, institutions. And I love how you frame this. The institutions meant what they said, but someone had to be the moral authority behind that. And so
Yep.
he turned his pen to basically forcing the institutions to be the thing they said they were going to be. And you see this also in Ben-Hur. So Lew Wallace, when Lew Wallace writes about Masala and he writes about Judah Ben-Hur, the reason why Judah Ben-Hur is on a mission of revenge that winds up in a chariot race to kill Masala, to kill the Roman, the reason why he's on that mission is because he believes that the Roman Empire did him wrong and someone should tell them no,
Hmm.
and someone should draw a line. Now what's interesting about Ben-Hur, which you don't see in this book, because Victor Hugo, and we're going to talk about the bishop here in a minute, I'm glad you brought that up, we're going to talk
Hmm.
about the bishop here in a minute, but in Ben-Hur, um uh the characters experience what in biblical terms is called a theophany. That's when God basically, or the divine, reaches into history and says, hey, I'm here, and then steps back out, right? And so Lew Wallace structured the interactions with Jesus as this theophany that was happening about 4 or 5 times in the book. Hugo does exactly the same thing, but he does it with, and this is the key difference, he does it with social reform. And
Hmm.
he believes that social reform is the way in which, romantically held social reform, by the way, is the
Right.
way in which you will establish moral authority and, to your point, get the institutions to live up to what they say.
Hmm.
Um, and I think this is hugely important for leaders to understand, and it runs across numerous books that we've covered on this show. And there's also a sense of heroism here, which I want to revisit sort of at the end, that goes along with this, and I think is missing from a lot of human rights activism in our time. There's no heroism involved in it. It's more like trolling or gaslighting or just, throwing grease in, or not, sorry, grease, throwing sand in gears to make a problem. not because you actually want to see things change, although people mouth the words of wanting to see things change, but they don't actually romantically believe it. And this is the disjuncture that I think, Les Mis lays out so nakedly, right, as a book.
Yeah, it's not just the vision statement, it's the actual embodiment of the vision, right?
Correct.
And,
Right.
it's not just virtue signaling and then patting me on the back because I say the right thing. It's actually demonstrating that what you state is actually going to be the good thing.
Right.
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 And do good for society.
Right. Well, and the French also, because they had the revolution, they had
Right.
this idea, and this is the other part of it that rocked the continent. They had this idea that, and this is hugely important in the America sort of, not sort of, America's Constitution and Declaration of Independence allowed us to avoid the excesses of the French Revolution, because that could have very easily happened here.
Yes.
Oh my God, it could have very easily happened here. Because our passions are the same as the same
Yeah.
as Frenchness.
Republic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right.
you what do you have? A republic if you can keep it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, what the French Revolution proved in very naked, stark terms was that, and this is where liberty and egalite and fraternite come from, that if the king who is set up as the avatar of God on earth can be gotten, then everything's open to everybody. The second they beheaded that king,
Yep.
like that was it, game on. And that's what all of the rulers of Europe got. They got that viscerally. That was the message that they sent out. And then to top it off, which Victor Hugo talks about this, we're going to talk about Napoleon today. Then to top it off, you have Napoleon, which that's a whole other kind of, I mean, that's a second half, back half of conversation. That's a whole other kind of thing. I'm fascinated by Napoleon. That dude was
Yeah.
real interesting. But that was like a 1-2 punch to the continent of Europe. And I don't think European powers have ever really fully recovered from that.
They haven't. They're still struggling.
Yeah.
That America or the US benefited from not having their history. Because we did kind of greenfield, what a republic was,
No kidding.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let me go into Les Mis here. I want to bring up the point because Libby talked about the bishop, and this is a good time to sort of bring this up. So the impact of religion on the French mindset, specifically Catholicism, on the French mindset. And I'm talking well, no, even down to today, but the pre-World War II French mindset, the 19th century conception of Catholicism, the 19th century conception of religion and religion as an estate in France, redounds through this book. And so I want to bring up some ideas here. I want to point out some things about Monsignor Bienvenue, chapter 12, book 1 of Les Misérables. And I quote, "There is almost always a squad of young abbes around a bishop, just as there is a flock of young officers around a general." By the way, one other point, just want to make, if you read this book, the turns of phrase in here are amazing. Victor Hugo, again, amazing writer. It flows really fast. You'll be 50 pages in, you won't even realize where the time went. Back to the book. They are what the charming St. Francis de Sales somewheres calls white-billed priests. Every profession has its aspirants who make up the cortege of those who are at the summit. No power is without its worshippers, no fortune without its court. The seekers of the future revolve around the splendid present. Every capital, like every general, has its staff. Every influential bishop has his patrol of undergraduates, cherubs who make the rounds and keep order in the bishop's palace, and who stand guard over the Monsignor's smile. To please, a bishop puts a foot in the stirrup for a subdeacon. Each must make his own way. The apostolate never disdains the canicate. And as elsewhere there are top brass in the church, there are rich miters. There are bishops who stand well at court, wealthy, well endowed, adroit, accepted in the world, knowing how to pray, no doubt, but also knowing how to ask favors, with few scruples about making themselves the viaduct of advancement for a whole diocese. Hyphens between the sacristy and diplomacy, more abbes than priests, prelates rather than bishops. Lucky are they who get near them. Men of influence as they are, they reign about them, upon their families and favorites, and upon all these young men who please them, fat parishes, sinecures, archdeaconates, chaplaincies, and cathedral functions, steps towards a bishop's dignities. In advancing themselves, they advance their satellites. It is a whole solar system in motion. The rays of their glory, their retinue purple. Their prosperity scatters its crumbs to those behind the scenes in the guise of nice little promotions. The larger the diocese of the patron, the larger the curacy of the favorite, or for the favorite. And then there is Rome. A bishop who could become an archbishop become a cardinal, leads you to the conclave. You enter into the rota. You have the pallium. There you are an auditor. You are a chamberlain. You are a monsignor. And from the grandeur to eminence, there is only a step. And between eminence and holiness, there is nothing but the smoke of a ballot. Every cowl may dream of the tiara. In our day, the priest is the only man who could regularly become a king. And what a king, the supreme king. So what a nursery of aspirations is a seminary. How many blushing choir boys, how many young abbes have the ambitious dairymaid's pail of milk on their heads? Who knows how easily ambition disguises itself under the name of calling, possibly in good faith, and deceiving itself in sanctimonious confusion. Monsignor Bienvenue, a humble, poor private person, was not counted among the rich miters. This was plain from the complete absence of young priests around him. We have seen that in Paris he did not fit in. No glorious future dreamed of alighting upon this solitary old man. No budding ambition was foolish enough to ripen in his shadow. His canons and his grand vicars were good old men, rather common like himself and like him, immured in that diocese from which there was no road to promotion, and they resembled their bishop with this difference that they were finished and he was perfected. The impossibility of getting ahead under Monsignor Bienvenue was so plain that fresh from the seminary, the young man ordained by him procured recommendations to the Archbishop of A or of Och and left immediately. For after all, we repeat, men like advancement. A saint addicted to abnegation is a dangerous neighbor. He is very likely to infect you with an incurable poverty, a stiffening of the articulations necessary to advancement, and, in fact, more renunciation than you would like. And men flee from this contagious virtue. Hence the isolation of Monsignor Bienvenue. We live in a sad society. Succeed. That is the advice which falls drop by drop from the overhanging corruption. Damn. Unbelievable. Look, I was listening to Orson Welles on The Third Man the other day. I love that old radio show. And he was running around trying to be some type of, he was trying to scam some people, of course, because he's hustling. And he was portraying himself not as a religious person, but as a like an emir or like a viceroy or some sort of royalty, right? Something with a sir on it. And then like some little kid basically upends his entire scam. And it turns out that this little kid is actually an earl, which is great. It was a great little thing. And so we've covered The Third Man on this show earlier this season. You should go check out that episode if you haven't listened to that already. And one of the lines in it at the end, when Orson Welles does a little wrap up, he says, as Harry Lime, he says, the wages of sin are not nearly high enough to justify the overhead. and as I read that piece,
great line.
That, oh my God, it's so good. Welles was so good. I think of the bishop here. And not because the bishop was sinful. Actually, the way Victor Hugo sets up the bishop, he's the only more genuinely moral man in the entire corpus of the book.
Yeah.
Monsignor Bienvenue is he the, how would you frame this, Libby? Is he the pebble that pushes Jean Valjean down the mountain, or is he or is he the hand that pushes him? Is he the pebble or the
The
hand? Like,
hand, it's the hand, it's the slight,
okay, yeah,
adjustment that's just needed to put you on course. You know, he had two paths to take,
right, right,
right? And he just eased him to the right versus the left,
right,
right? Yeah.
right,
Just
and
a soft touch.
just a
Yeah.
soft touch, and he did it in, but he couldn't have done it without having the moral authority. And he sets up the bishop because this is what I mean. He sets up the Monsignor. This is who he starts with. He opens the book with the Monsignor. Like you would think the book would open with Jean Valjean and
Right.
Javert and Fantine and all these characters and their tragedy and da da da. No, he starts with the moral authority. He starts with the moral guy, and to his point about abnegation, he totally and completely he makes him not right for this world. That's what it is. Like he made the bishop right, not right for this world. And that's the only way I think Hugo could justify, I guess, that morality. Um, because all these other characters are, to his point, they're ambitious and scheming and grasping. Even Jean Valjean, scheming and grasping, right? Even Cassette, right? Like scheming and grasping, right? Grabbing for something, whether that's love or attention or whatever their perspective of legal righteousness is. I'm looking at you, Javert. But like all these other characters are grasping and scheming and ambitious, but not the Monsignor. He doesn't want anything. And you can't do anything with a man like that.
No, that's the problem. That's uh, they try they don't want someone who believes in like life after death, who isn't afraid of death, who isn't afraid of having nothing
Right,
because you can't control that person.
right.
um but I think you would have a without the decision um to give Valjean, the candlesticks and all that, you wouldn't have that decision point so clearly demarked. It wasn't even a decision point, it was an action.
Mm-hmm.
You saw Valjean just starting to, well, you believe I'm a thief? I'm a thief. I have no other choice. You've given me no other choice. And we hear about this for, low income, people, when no one has a belief in you
Mm-hmm.
and you're told you're a thief and you're not, and you just, 20 years for, in prison for stealing a slice of bread. And then, it was a 5-year sentence that turned into 20 because you kept trying to escape. you know. And then afterwards, you hear this with convicts now, afterwards you have a yellow card that says, I'm a thief, I'm a thief. And everyone just treats you a certain way until that one person doesn't and sees the glimmer in you and sees the hope and gives you the chance to redeem yourself and not even with him, but just in life.
Mm-hmm.
I talk a lot about small moments can change the trajectory in another person's life. And this is an example of that, except my moments are even smaller. It's giving a person, someone who maybe is in line in front of you at the grocery store who's um, being extremely mean to those around them, and you just give them a smile, maybe
Mm-hmm.
let them go in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
and you have no idea why that person is the way they are. It could just be, they've had a really bad day or they were just fired. Um, but by showing them a moment of grace, you might knock them out of their moment and they return to who they are in their soul for the
Mm-hmm.
remainder of the day. And that may be that they treat their children better at the end of the day than they would have if they come home still angry and feeling like the world is out to get them. But
Mm-hmm.
regardless, this is one of those small moments where someone saw him as other than a thief and gave him the grace to show him,
Mm-hmm.
that, to show. show him grace. And with that, he made the decisions to invest and build a business and then help others to prosper as much as you
Right.
can in those days. But it's still
Right.
that same idea. So small, without this moment of grace, and it is interesting that it has to be given by someone of the church, but if that, it probably has the most power because you can make the assumption that they had no alternative, you know, agenda
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
use all of our common vernacular and
Right. Yeah.
in ways that things are being positioned nowadays. Like he was giving grace, he did the right thing,
Hmm.
and for the rest of his life, he did the right thing, because that's who he was.
Right.
Like he wouldn't let someone hang
Right.
wrongly for being thought of being him.
Right.
And but
Well,
yeah,
and
anyway,
that whole tussle that he goes through, that long dark night of the soul, right, where he's trying to decide what is he going to do, the way Hugo describes
yeah.
that moral, not dilemma, that moral wrestling, it put me in mind of put me in mind in the book of Genesis,
Mhm.
when Jacob wrestles with the angel, right, or in some cases, depending upon what your translation of the Bible is, you'll see that he wrestled with God or he wrestled with Jesus, right? It was Jesus anyway. So he's wrestling, and it put me in, or Jean Valjean's wrestling put me in mind of that moment. And I do think, not I think, I know. So Hugo, knew the Bible. He knew all the corpus of that and how that impacted and engaged with literature. He also knew classic literature. He knew all of the things, right? And so he brought all of that to the table here in Les Mis, but then he turns it into something very specific and uh, very French in an environment where, and this is the other thing. Now I want to talk about poverty in an environment where poverty that we can't imagine is
Right.
just
You
the
can't.
standard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, so the Thenardines, right? The
Family.
family
Yeah.
that Fantine leaves Cosette with. Unbelievable to me. Like I'm reading this and I'm going, I mean, I know these things happen today. I'm not naive.
But
But
it's not the norm today, and it
it's not
was
the norm
then.
today,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're reading this, and actually it's interesting. So as I was reading this book, because it's taken me a few months to sort of go through it, I started reading this back in February. um in um in March, I went to a speech and debate tournament. My daughter is involved in speech and debate. I went to one of her tournaments, and one of the parents there is from France, and she saw me reading Les
Ah,
Mis.
uh-huh.
And she came over and she's like, "Oh yeah, I read that. I did the audio version of that book because I couldn't read it and I was in my car, so whatever." And she's like, "I'm from France." And then she's like, "That book is amazing." And so we had a whole hour-long conversation about the book. And I asked her this question. I said, as a French speaker, and as a person, French native, what does this book mean to you? And she said, this book is the history. It's part of the history of our country. It is the
Right.
history of our country. And she said she's in her 60s. She said that the way that the way that the poverty and the social climate is structured. She said, "Oh yeah, we learned about all this in history.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just the way things were, you know." And she said it so casually, and I was struck by, as I often am when I talk to people from other countries who are not Americans,
Mhm.
who have now chosen to live in America. And then we wound up talking about French politics. By the way, she's not a fan of the current prime minister, and is very desirous of voting against him. But she's like, I have to go back to France. I have to live there for like 3 months so I could vote. And she's like, it's not worth it. Like, just leave. She's like, she's trying to get her family out. She's like, just leave. Man's an idiot. Just go. Anyway,
Yeah.
point is, I'm struck once again by how the things that folks from other countries just casually accept as the way of life, we've basically said, we don't have to do that. And so we're going to go off and do something different. And you're also seeing this with like the Europeans that are coming over, and folks from other countries as well, that are coming over to the World Cup venues now with the FIFA
So
World Cup
agree.
going on.
Yeah.
Oh my God. This is like the World Cup, honestly, like this is the best thing that could have happened to America at this time in a while. Like, not like Europeans and folks from all over other places, all over the world, are coming to America and interacting with Americans and seeing that it's not all of what you see on TikTok videos and nonsense from the media. Like 80% of the people in America are not what you see online. You know, like I watched. I mean, I'm not watching any of the games. I saw a game in a restaurant,
Yeah.
and one of the venues was Philadelphia, and I was sitting there with my wife, and I was joking. I was joking with my wife. I was like, "Oh yeah, it's Philadelphia. Philly fan gonna like put on a show now," because Philadelphia is the worst sports city. Yes, I did say it. Sorry to all my
Yeah.
fans of Philadelphia, but it is the worst sports city on the East Coast,
Yeah.
bar none. Like it beats Boston by a country mile.
For
Because
sure. But
Philly
it's not intellectual enough to make the
this Philly fan don't care. I mean,
the
they,
story. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, you know, like it's. I think it's one of two. The Philadelphia Eagles Stadium is one of two stadiums in the NFL where there's an actual like jail.
What's the other one?
I
I
think
would
it's
have
the
said
Raiders.
Raiders.
I think it's
Yeah.
the Raiders. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
Raiders. I think the
yeah.
Raiders is the other one. I might be
Yeah.
wrong on this. I can
Yeah.
be fact checked on this. But yeah, Philly has a lockup. Like, of course. And nobody goes, oh no, that's weird. That's out. No, that absolutely that tracks. That tracks with that town. No, that's fine. Um, but you know, you see the World Cup venues and you see these international players and these international visitors, and America is just being America. We're just hanging out doing the thing we've always done. And they are here finding out on a visit.
We're not what their politicians tell you. We're not
Right,
what the media tells you. But I
right.
actually think it's an analogy also for the big US cities and people who live in those cities. If they were to actually start participating beyond their, beyond where they live, they might actually see how great America is too.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
it is super fabulous, and it always takes those wake up calls, for
Mm-hmm.
people to go, oh my gosh, like if I actually just get out of, the news and the politicians and I go travel and talk to people, it's like, wow, the world you know, isn't even half as bad. Or,
or, or you know, you could read Les Mis and watch how Hugo describes the grinding poverty that creates
yeah,
the tragedy and go, oh my God, yes, we have poor people in this country, but we would never, I won't say we would never, the level of outcry that there would be if we had a situation like what happened with Fantine, like her entire arc of her life, the level of outcry against that would be unbelievable if that were happening now. And I'm not saying that we're better. I'm saying to
oh no,
Libby's
no, no.
point,
It's about the evolution of
it's the
civilization.
evolution of civil. Yes,
Right.
yes,
But
yes.
what I actually found really interesting when you were conveying what the woman who left her country and came to the
Yeah,
US, was saying is like, well, that's just the way it is. It also
right.
reminds me, that's the French history is that's the way it is, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
level of kind of acceptance if that's okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to go, double click on that from a nuanced perspective because I remember when LA was starting to see crime rates, rise quite a bit. And this was like 2021, 2022. And one of the famous actors is like, it's a city. Like that's what happens. So when you have extremely low expectations, you start to dismiss the things that need to be expectations for people. That's what I think about, like these, the homeless issue, and that I bring up a lot in California because to me it's immoral to allow like people to live like that for their own for their own being. It's not a
Hmm.
gift to them because they want to just be partying and living outside. It's actually um, inhuman to not wish better conditions for them, to not provide better conditions for them, and to ignore you know that we can actually help them by bringing them inside and cleaning them and giving them proper food and helping them with mental issues and that type of thing. So it's just kind of it's just kind of the laissez-faire, let me
Hmm.
see, taken to a far extreme because you don't have higher expectations of humanity.
Well, Libby, okay, let me ask you this question. We just watched the LA mayoral race occur.
Yes.
And I'm not going to get into the race itself. I'm not going to get into any of that. That's not the thing that we do on this show. Not going to worry about it.
Right.
Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask this question. Out of the candidates who won the race for LA mayor, not the run the race, run the primary to run for LA mayor, out of the candidates that are in that democratically controlled city, okay, who is going to have the moral authority to say, as Hugo has done in Les Mis through his characters, that this cannot stand? I don't see Karen Bass doing that.
No, you see talking points that
Sure.
don't reflect what would actually help individuals. Like affordability, like I
Right.
hear affordability, but
Right.
I don't hear a recognition of what's causing it to not be affordable
Right.
being addressed. It's more about we'll just tax more so that we can buy versus we have building codes that are extremely expensive. Like, you know, there's one famous podcaster, Adam Carolla, who is why it's showing the rebuilding of a home down on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And that home was on stilts, just like Venice's. For 70, it was on stilts for 70 years, and the only thing that took it out was a fire, but not the water and all that. And now that home has to be built. The foundation for that home costs like a couple $1 million, and it's all pillars that are, pillars that are being steel pillars that have to go into the ground. And then, there's things that they're concerned about from a water perspective, which I get, but it was good enough from a safety perspective with the pillars, with the wood pilings. So when you just hear talking points, which is when I watch Hugo's
Mm-hmm.
evolution, it's the difference between, the monarch and Napoleon keep saying, this is what we're going to do for you, but not delivering
Mm-hmm.
when you have base needs that need to be met, and they keep promising, but they're not. Hugo's like, the government isn't going to be the answer. And when I
Right.
listen to, and, the single government that's been controlling that state hasn't addressed all of their solutions don't actually seem to address the actual problem. And then
Right.
you have another candidate whose solutions actually are getting to the root causes, like mental illness,
Yeah.
and building codes and, the things that are actually, building codes and not enough people to help with inspections and, so that to me is moral authority because you're actually getting to the solutions that are going to solve problems. And when you see the person who has solutions that address a root cause, and then um, uh, they're challenged by the power structure, you do have to ask, who has the moral authority? It's the person typically who's getting pushed out and
Right.
who's losing everything but still wants to speak.
Well, Well, you brought it up earlier, and I think it's worth repeating yet again that institutions should do what they say they're going to do, right?
Exactly.
And not someone, one of the things in democracy, small d democracy, is all of the people are responsible nominally for ensuring that the institutions do well, all the institutions do what they say they're going to do. Now, in a republic, which is what we have in the United States, we vote for people. And then those people are the ones that are supposed to make the institutions do what they say they're going to do. Now, the people that we vote for have to have some kind of moral weight. There also has to be consequences for failure. And the frustrating thing for many Americans over the last 25 years, regardless of who I talk to, left, right, or center, the main frustration, politically left, politically right, politically center, doesn't matter. The number one frustration is that there are no seeming consequences for failure. So if your city has a fire that could have been prevented if the fire hydrants had water in them,
Right.
there should be a penalty. There should be accountability for that failure.
Exactly.
I'm going to scale this up even further. Actually, I'm going to use another example. If you are a politician and you decide that you're going to comment on something in the culture, and your commentary is 180 degrees, as my mother would say, from sideways,
Mm-hmm.
which means it's not relevant for those of you in Rio Linda. There should be a consequence for that. I'm not saying that your right to speak should be abrogated. I'm not saying you should be shut up.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
There should be, right.
But there should be consequences for that. I'm going to scale it up a little further. If you go to Congress and you were a $15 an hour barista, and after a term in Congress, one term, you come out a millionaire,
Right.
there should be consequences there should be accountability for that. I don't get to start at $15 an hour and a year later make $1 million. That's not how things work. So what the frustrating thing is that there seems to be no consequences for failure. And Hugo in Les Mis lays out what the consequences for failure are. He lays out, and we're going to talk about Napoleon now, he lays out what failure actually looks like and what it actually means to experience those consequences and how wide-ranging they are for society. In our time, I think for leaders, we have to realize that at a certain point, the laws of physics just work. Like the laws of reality just are what they are.
Well, and this is what, yeah, and as you were speaking, I was really thinking about this really clearly, like, when you've scaled up and everything's centralized,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's there's opacity, and it's harder to trace where a breakdown in moral authority is. So
Mm-hmm.
there's I care about affordability, yet we're not seeing affordability
Right.
addressed. And that's for the common man, the middle class, lower middle class, and upper class. And, we have to, and one of the reasons we haven't seen consequences for actions is because we haven't, in theory, folks are saying our vote matters. We're told it is, but there's so much opacity to the system that
Mm-hmm.
I can't trust that your moral authority is actually translated, that you actually have deserved moral authority. You're telling me every vote matters and you're counting them all fairly and everything is legal. There's there's too much opacity
Hmm.
in the system, and too many places for that trust to break down. And I
Hmm.
mean by that, with if let make it very, very simple, decentralized accountability. Yeah, we all vote the same day. We show our ID. There's, two people watching the system, watching people take their votes, take the ID. That to me is a demonstration that those who are saying democracy matters and your vote can matters, there, it's visible to me
Hmm.
that it does because of what I see, my reality, what I
Hmm.
see, not what I hear. And so we've seen now we're told the system is fair, even though you can in California, you can receive votes up to 20 days after the election, and as long as it has a written post date on it, not even a UPS or United States Postal Service stamp on it. If it's believed that that date may be correct, then you can accept it. So you've started to put too many barriers to my trust in the way, and that's why you start to get a populist uprising, is
Yeah.
because you no longer are deserved of the moral authority that you once were, because reality is no longer lined up with
Yep.
your words.
Correct.
Um,
Yes. 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 And you know what? We Populism is a dirty word these days, right? Just like nationalism is a dirty word.
Yep.
Um, you know, but it's only a dirty word to people
In
who
power.
in power, who have benefited from the opacity. They've skated by on
Exactly.
accountability. They've gotten paid, and not just paid in money. They get paid in status and in attention and in power and in influence. Money is like the least worrisome thing,
In
honestly.
in tribalism, identity is the number one thing that can control. Yeah, when you talk about cults,
Mm-hmm.
identity is the driver of cult-like behavior.
Right, exactly,
You
exactly,
know?
exactly. And so and then when you question the opacity, or you question the lack of transparency, or you question the accountability, you are then put in the box of, and I'm going to use this term, an election denier, or you're shuffled off to the darker corners of the internet where all the crazy people hang out, because who couldn't possibly believe that all of our elections are free and fair?
But watch what is happening. A person who has courage of their convictions and is saying something that will ostracize them from society, right? Like
Yeah,
when
yeah,
people are saying things that could have them lose their jobs, can have them lose their position in their community, um, you know, that's why a populism resonates, is
mm-hmm.
because there's so much sacrifice that comes with like
Right,
stating the
right.
things that could get you jailed or lose your job, that type of thing. The reason why um the reality star
Mm-hmm.
resonated is because he was actually talking to the things that we saw every day that everyone was telling us doesn't exist.
Right,
And we're working on it, and this is how wasn't translating, were these ephemeral intellectual ideas that weren't translating into reality. And then you had someone who was actually dealing with the things that, talking about the things that we saw every day that we'd been hearing for 5, 10 years were supposed to be addressed and weren't. And he actually seemed to have solutions that a practical mind said, yeah, that would work.
right,
Those who live in reality. And
right,
so the moral authority, like the religious individual, the bishop, was actually acting in reality because
right.
he understood human motivation.
Yes,
And
yes,
he understood how shame could turn someone and continued shaming of someone could turn them down a path into a life of crime
Hmm.
versus a moment, giving someone grace could
Hmm.
create the goodwill and the desire to
Hmm.
help and do good. That's
Hmm.
much more powerful than anything else, so
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding human nature. Ay, ay,
Yeah.
ay. But
Ay,
this
ay,
moral
ay.
authority is very important because it's not the vision statement, it's the actual operating and living by the principles that you purport to be true.
You purport to be true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
And
hmm,
Hugo, and that's what Hugo learned this, and he could speak to it so beautifully because he'd struggled with every stage of this himself.
yes. 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 Well, and this is why I said this already, but I'll say it again. His
Yeah.
characters are fully realized. They are
Yep.
three-dimensional. Even the Thenardines, who are sort of sub-villains, they are fully realized. Fantine is fully realized. Cosette is fully realized. Um, the Monsignor fully realized. Even the young men who were the group of girls that Fantine was a part of,
Yeah.
and then the young men that were their lovers and they're cavorting around or whatever, and then of course he knocks Fantine up and then disappears into the night. Does the Johnny Appleseed move? Even that guy is fully realized. Like he gives him a beginning, a middle, and an end. And actually the end is that he became like some low level mayor in some town or whatever.
Yeah.
and and there's no castaway characters in this book. Every one of them is so tightly written and so fully realized. And I think they're fully realized because, and we're going to turn the corner here and talk about Napoleon, and then wrap up, at least for today. But they're fully realized because I think Hugo, as a romanticist, and I say this on the show as myself, or I tag myself with this, he was a fan of human beings. He
Yeah.
actually liked people. He
Yeah,
actually thought
exactly.
people had potential.
He did. I think he did, and I think that I agree with you. Okay, so we have Javert, who
Mm-hmm.
believes in the letter of the law,
Of the law. Yes.
right? We have the Thénardier, who's
Thenardier.
a
Yeah.
criminal, and I'm going to be a criminal,
Yep.
and even though you thought I was a good man, and I benefited from it, I'm still going to be a criminal.
Right.
And then you have Jean Valjean, who actually, in my mind, he did a crime out of love,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like for his sister, because he wanted to feed her and her family. He did a crime out of love. And I don't believe you should, but when you're looking at the pyramid of, Maslow's pyramid of needs, if you don't have that base level met, like people have to eat,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
things are going to happen. But he was like, well, maybe I'm not love. This is Libby's interpretation. When he's
Mm-hmm.
told over and over and over again he's a criminal and he's gonna have this scarlet letter for the rest of his life. He's like, they keep telling him not no love, no love, you're a criminal. He's like, well, then I'll act like one, kind of like, defiantly.
Mm-hmm.
But then someone shows grace, he's like, I can see that love.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my interpretations of the bishop, but I can see that love and you have it in you, and I'm going to help you by doing the right thing. And so that's what drives him, Valjean through the rest of the book is, I'm going to do the right thing. And he does do the right thing. And it's kind of out of love and, getting him out of those base needs by building a
Yeah.
business and being able to support himself and to help others so that he's not having to act out of base needs.
Base needs.
But
Yeah.
he's the most human and redemptive character
Mm-hmm.
that I think, Hugo's using as a model of even though
Mm-hmm.
you've sinned, you can redeem yourself and make the right path, make the right choice.
And make the right choice. Yes. And it's human beings that have to be involved in relationship with each other in
And
order
just
for
realize that we're flawed, but you don't have to accept that moment of flaw.
right.
And, if small moments are big, you got to continue to move forward and redeem yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let me go to something that I just absolutely struck me in well, one of the many things that struck me in this book. The So we go to Cassette, book one. So the chapter on Cassette starts out with probably the best description I had ever read of the battle at Waterloo. Exactly what happened there. And it opens up with what you see on the way from Nivellier, Hougomont, talking about the doors and the orchard. And then June 18th, 1815. I read these chapters, and then he goes into the quid obscurum of battles. I'm just reading the chapter titles. 4:00 in the afternoon. Napoleon in a good mood. The emperor asks the guide Lacosta a question. The unexpected. And the plateau of Mont Saint Jean. And then finally wraps up with bad guide for Napoleon, good for Bulow, the guard, and of course the catastrophe. Now, these 14 chapters in the first book, cover about 40 pages. And he sums up the entire Battle of Waterloo and he sums up Napoleon in the 15th chapter, Cambronne. And I'm going to read from this, and then we're going to talk about a man I'm fascinated by, Napoleon Bonaparte. Out of respect to the French reader, the finest word, perhaps, that a Frenchman ever uttered cannot be repeated to him. We are prohibited from applying the sublime to history. At our own risk and peril, we violate that prohibition. Among these giants, then, there was one Titan, Cambronne. To speak that word and then to die, what could be greater? For to accept death is to die, and it is not this man's fault if, in the storm of grape shot, he survived. The man who won the Battle of Waterloo is not Napoleon, put to rout, nor Wellington, giving way at 4:00, desperate at 5, not Blucher, who did not fight. The man who won the Battle of Waterloo was Cambronne. To burst out with such a word at the thunderbolt that kills you is victory. To give this answer to disaster, to say this to destiny, to supply this base for the future lion, to fling down this reply to the rain of the previous night, to the treacherous wall at Hougomont, to the sunken road of Ohain, to Grouchy's delay, to Blucher's arrival, to be ironic in the sepulchre, to act so as to remain upright after falling, to drown the European coalition in 2 syllables, privies that the Caesars were already privy to make the last words the first, by associating it with the glory of France, to close Waterloo insolently with a Mardi Gras, to complete Leonidas with Rabelais, to sum up this victory in one supreme word that cannot be spoken, to lose the field and to recover history after this carnage, to have the laugh on his side is immense. It is an insult to the thunderbolt. It attains the grandeur of Aeschylus. This word of Cambronne's, by the way, the word was merde, has the effect of a fracture. It is the breaking of a heart by scorn. It is a surplus of agony and explosion. Who conquered? Wellington? No. Without Blucher, he would have been lost. Blucher? No. If Wellington had not begun, Blucher could not have finished. This Cambronne, coming at the final hour, this unknown soldier, this infinitesimal particle of war, senses a lie within a catastrophe, doubly bitter. And at the moment when he is bursting with rage, he is offered this mockery. Life? How could he restrain himself? They are there. All the kings of Europe, the fortunate generals, the thundering Jupiters. They have 100,000 victorious soldiers, and behind the 100,000, 1,000,000 their guns with matches lit stand open-mouthed. They have the Imperial Guard and the Grande Armée under their feet. They have just crushed Napoleon, and Cambronne alone remains. None but this earthworm is left to protest. He will protest. So he looks for a word as one looks for a sword. Froth comes to his mouth, and this froth is the word. Faced with this prodigious and mediocre victory, this victory without victors, the desperate man draws himself up. He suffers its enormity, but he recognizes its nothingness, and he does more than spit on it. Overwhelmed in numbers and material strength, he finds in his soul a means of expression, excrement. We repeat, to say that, to do that, to find that, is to be a conqueror. The spirit of great days entered this unknown man at that fatal moment. Cambronne finds the word for Waterloo, as Rouget de Isle finds the Marseille, through an inspiration from above. A breath from the divine maelstrom passes across these men, and they tremble, and the one sings the supreme song, the other utters the terrible cry. This word of titanic scorn, the Cambronne throws out not merely at Europe in the name of the empire, that would be but little. He throws it out at the past in the name of the revolution. It is heard, and men recognize in Cambronne the old soul of the giants. It is as though Danton was speaking, or Kléber roaring. To this word from Cambronne, the English voice replied, fire. The batteries flared, the hill trembled. From all those brazen throats went forth a final terrible vomiting of grape shot. Vast clouds of smoke, dusky white in the light of the rising moon, rolled away, and when the smoke settled, there was nothing left. That formidable remnant was annihilated. The guard was dead. The four walls of the living redoubt had fallen. Hardly could a quivering be detected here and there among the corpses, and thus the French legions, grander than the Roman legions, expired at Mont Saint-Jean on ground soaked in rain and blood in the somber wheat fields, somber wheat fields, at the spot where today, at 4 a.m, whistling and gaily whipping up his horse, Joseph drives by with the mail from Nivelles. I am a fan of military history. I've read quite a bit of it. I had never read before I read this something like that before. If you know what, and I'll tell my story now about Les Mis, the movie. So this is my story. When the movie came out with Anne Hathaway a few years ago, and Russell Crowe plays Javert, and I can't remember who it was, the guy from The Greatest Showman. What's his name? Wolverine, that guy.
Yeah, I can't think of his name either.
I can't think of his name right now. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But he was Jean Valjean, right? Okay. Big to do about this movie. My wife was like, oh, we should go see this. Like, okay. I get in there, I get my tickets, I, get into the theater, I, put my seat back, and Russell Crowe starts singing. And 2 hours later, I wake up and the whole thing's over. and, and so when I picked up the book Les Mis, my wife, remembering this, of course, asks me, how long is it going to take you to get through this book? How long are you going to go in this book before you give up? I'm like, well, I'll just keep going until I stop. I don't know, until the book stops or whatever. And it is moments, and this is the reason why I bring this up, it is moments like Waterloo, the description of the Battle of Waterloo, how he breaks that sucker down over 15 chapters. That's what I wanted to see in the movie. I wanted that's what I wanted. Yeah. That's it. I would have stayed awake for that.
There's none of that in the movie.
Instead, none of that's in the movie. Instead, we get a whole bunch of other different things, which is fine. I'm going to get to something else here at the end of our episode here, which actually, like I said, kind of opened a door for me in my head, based off of a song that was from the movie that I heard this weekend at a recital that I was at. So that description though of Cambronne and the end of Waterloo, how he breaks down the battlefield and breaks down what happened there. It was a stunning achievement by someone who I don't think ever fired a weapon at anybody in anger like ever.
Right.
The familiarity that Hugo had with Napoleon and how Waterloo was such a disaster for not just Napoleon, but I think it was a disaster for the French mindset as well, that they didn't really fully recover from. And actually, being a person who believes that World War I is the headwaters for all the nonsense that happened in the 20th century.
Hmm.
I now understand at a deeper level why the French felt so compelled to continue to throw men into the Western Front during World War I.
Oh,
Just unbelievable, the numbers of Frenchmen that died in the Western Front. And they wouldn't stop throwing those men in there. They could have just stopped. They could have just not sent any more men to the front, but they couldn't do it because they had to. And I think this is not putting something on the French military mind that wasn't there. They had to erase the shame of Napoleon's defeat at
yeah.
Waterloo. And you would think that because Waterloo happened, what, 1815? Yeah, so it's 1815, right? Um,
Hmm.
Battle of Waterloo happened in 1815. You're telling, and 80 years, 90 years later, they're still dealing with the shame of that. And so they just throw people into World War I. They just throw the men into the maw. And it's because of what happened at Waterloo. And that really came home to me with Hugo's description of what happened. Um, and he doesn't go into the psychology of Napoleon. Thank God. He doesn't psychologize the trauma. He just
Right.
says, this is the thing that happened. He dramatizes it and he romanticizes it, of course, because he's a romanticist, and a romantic writer, but he doesn't psychologize it. He doesn't try to like he doesn't try what a modern novelist would try to do. He doesn't try to make Napoleon what do you call it acceptable, or make his actions understandable. He doesn't judge Napoleon as being problematic. He just says, no, I mean, like, these are the vagaries of history. So we were going to have a battle here, and the thunderbolt's going to fall here, and the beginning of the decline of the French, not even the decline, the end of the French Revolution was at Waterloo. And this is what he wants you to feel. And so it's amazing. This is just an amazing chapter to me.
But what happened from a Napoleon perspective, for the 10, for the what, 15 years before that, 20 years before that,
Yeah.
that led to that culmination?
Um, you mean before Napoleon?
Well, no,
So,
as part of Napoleon's reign, why would
mhm.
it end like that?
Oh, well, because you have the dynamic of the French people, which Hugo is definitely clearly on board with. You have the dynamic of the institutions, the estates, right? The first estate, the second estate, the third estate, the fourth estate, right? Which is, of course, their class system, which they sought
Right.
to paper over. um, but then the third leg of that chair is Napoleon himself. And so one of the reasons I'm fascinated by Napoleon is because of the ego on that man.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah, the ego on that man was incredible. Like, I will often say that the things that we like about people are also the things that or the things that people are good at is the things that often upend them at the end of
Right.
the day, right?
Yep.
So, my grandmother warned me years ago, God rest her soul, but she warned me years ago, your mouth's going to get you in trouble. And she was right. She's exactly right. My mouth gets me in trouble all the time. Grandma was exactly correct. But my mouth is also what makes me money,
Yep.
So you got to take the bitter with the sweet, right? Um, Napoleon, what made Napoleon able to see how the armies of Europe could be fractured and shattered, and could be brought to heel, the thing that made him see that was also the thing that led to the defeat at Waterloo. It's the same thing. It was the thing that led to him making a mistake going into Russia. Like, you don't go into Russia. Everybody knows this. Like, you
Yeah.
don't you don't go to Russia in the winter. Sorry,
Yeah.
no, no, never, never. Everybody knows this. This is not anything unusual. They knew this even then, but his ego, his ego said, "I am Napoleon," and Napoleon was the first sort of example of. Well, you see it in the picture of his crowning as emperor, where he takes the crown from the pope or from the bishop or whoever it is that's going to crown him, and he puts it on his own head. himself. I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
That's the guy in a nutshell. Like that's all you need. And then, but there's going, and the thing is, the knock-on effects from that, it is a thunderbolt. So you're gonna ride the lightning with that guy. And for a while there, for
It worked.
15,
Yeah.
yeah, for 15 years, it was worth it. It was worth it for the French to ride the lightning like that.
But then, yeah, it was hubris ultimately that took them down and then weakened the
Yeah.
resolve of the people.
Yeah, it was hubris. It was a fair bit of narcissism, on Napoleon's part. I also think that the French people fell in love with Napoleon's ego. So it's not Napoleon the man. And
Right.
at this point in world history, I mean, 200 years later, he's become a symbol of things, right? So he's no longer a human. He's no longer a fully fleshed out human being. He's a symbol now. But to get to be a symbol, you have to have an entire group of people. To your point about tribalism earlier, you have to have an entire group of people just fall in love with that thing. And Hugo was in love with Napoleon too, you know,
Until he wasn't.
until he wasn't. And then, but he still wasn't able to look at him clear eyed, because
Right.
it comes with all that.
Yeah.
Napoleon came with all that baggage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I get it. You know, was he a military genius, or was he a person who took advantage of circumstances? Well, I can tell you from my study of military history and from sort of what I've looked at over the long course of time, most commanders who are considered geniuses, quite frankly, it's a combination of incredible skill, focus, egos in there, and nobody likes to hear it, but it's true, luck.
Right.
Fortune, it's
Yeah.
opportunity.
Opportunity favors the prepared mind.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
right.
Right. And it was
So,
just the right time in history.
right. And you can't, I mean, you wouldn't really want to replicate a guy like Napoleon, but you can't anyway. Hitler tried,
Well,
um,
yeah.
and that didn't work, because his ego was pushed a different direction. He was being pushed by different his not being pushed. He was seeking to mold different historical forces. Um, you know, the 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 other piece about this is Waterloo is presented as a tragic event. And the line that runs through all of Les Mis is tragedy. Um, and it's not tragic in terms of the way we think of, like, as I said before, we try to psychologize the tragedy
Right.
in our time. Hugo's not doing any of that. He's merely presenting it as it is and just saying, yes, this is the tragedy. Here you go. And that's why this book will continue to be read for like another 200, 300 years, because unlike the Greek, he's what Hugo is doing in the best way is doing what the Greek classicists do when they present a tragedy. This is just the way life is. And who can you appeal to? There's no one to appeal to. This is just life. And we are consistently, because of our Christianity in America, that's the thread that runs through all of it. We're consistently trying to find someone to appeal to for the tragedies of life. So we talked about homelessness earlier, right? In terms of a political problem. Now let me talk about it in terms of a human problem. Some people are homeless because of tragic circumstances in their lives.
Hmm.
And even if they had different circumstances, which, by the way, we can't make different circumstances for them, but we want to, but wanting isn't enough. Even
Right.
if they had those different circumstances, there's no guarantee that their life still wouldn't be a tragedy. This is the lottery winner who actually wins the lottery and then a
Yeah.
year later is broke. That's because their
Yep.
life is tragic. And there's nothing you can do
Or
about
it's
that.
a series of bad decisions. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
And those bad decisions create the tragedies. And until that person um decides, like Jean Valjean did, decides with grace or not, we would love it to be with grace. But until that person decides to make a different choice, it's going to continue to be a tragedy. So there's a great character in the great American television show of the last like 25 years, The Wire. There's a character in there, a drug addict named Bubs, right? And Bubs is a drug addict. He's an informer to the cops. And you know, they Bub's arc is one of redemption. He has a redemptive arc. But there's a great line he has, and I can't remember what season it's in. It might be in season 3 of The Wire, where he says, I believe it's to the female cop, if I remember correctly, who's trying to help him, trying to start him, trying to show that grace, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
Monsignor.
Yeah.
Bubs says it's a long way from heaven to here. And that's true for a lot of people. Like, if I'm poor, I live in the same town as people who are rich. So I can go across the tracks to, I can't attend that school, but I can go across the tracks to a school where rich kids are attending and stare through the bars. No one's going to stop me. We have that freedom of movement. Now, are the cops going to come along and roust me? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Are they going to come along and hassle me? Sure. Yeah. But I can go see it. I can go see the vision of that. But how many people cross the tracks one way or another to see the vision? They don't. That's now, we in our country, in our time, we look at that as the fault of reality, and we are seeking to remake that through all of our politics and our arguments and our culture, because we think that's not fair and that's not nice and that's not right. And our biggest sin these days is to not be fair or nice or right. But that's actually not what Hugo thinks, I don't think. I think Hugo thinks, isn't it a tragedy that you don't go across the tracks? And that's the period at the end of that sentence.
Well, there's just themes of about personal accountability, choice
Yeah.
and choice and redemption. And
Yeah.
you can grow up in a family of criminals and where that was accepted and say, I'm just a criminal, so that's going to be who I am. Or you say, I don't want to live that life and I want to live, a more moral, empowered life. It's the same thing as like a child who's born to, whose father was an alcoholic, and you have two children who are born to families with abusive, alcoholic fathers. One
Mm-hmm.
says, I have no choice but to be exactly the same way. And the other says, I'm going to do everything in my power to not be that person.
Right.
And, the person who says, I'm going to do everything in my power not to be that person, tends to have a better life because they make a set of decisions to not be the same as to accept a certain way because it's been
Yeah.
pushed on them.
Right.
And then another, that was the story arc that Valjean could have taken. He could have said,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm a criminal, I'm just going to be a criminal. Or
Right.
he said, no, I know that I have that arc of love. I'm not going to be a criminal. I'm going to do everything in my life to live a virtuous life. So
Well, and this is the
what
other,
our country was founded on was the empowered, accountable individual who could create their own reality.
right.
And and we're trying to be turned into well, you can't control it, so we'll turn to others to help you to live a better life as we dictate, as opposed to just giving you a place of personal accountability and choices that can actually help you to live an empowered and thriving life,
Well, and Hugo, he as
which
a
is more Christian,
right,
right?
and as a romantic, he
That is
didn't
a
think
romantic. That is the classical liberal view of life.
it is the classic. Yes, it is the classic. Yes, no, you're right. It is the classical liberal view of life, and
Yep.
a a romantic who is in love with human beings
Exactly. Who
as
knows what they're
people
capable of,
who knows
who
what they're
knows
capable
that
of.
you can thrive no matter what has happened to you. Cosette could have also said, I'm just going to be a hooker, or I'm going to be a
Right.
criminal, and I'm going to, but no, she didn't accept. Yeah, well, she was given opportunities and she took advantage of those opportunities, right?
Correct.
To
Right.
live a full life.
Well, and let me be very clear here. Hugo believed in changing of economic.
I agree. That's core
Yeah,
to this. Yes.
yeah, yeah. That the economy had to be better. I mean, this is the other theme with the poverty piece that runs through Les Mis is the grinding poverty that is causing people to make these decisions has to change. And that's in the
Yep.
best sort of line of thinking from the French Revolution on through Hugo's life. Now, on the one hand, he did see tragedies as being periods at the end of the sentence. He also held in tension this idea that you're talking about, Libby, of the ability of human beings, if they are given different economic circumstances, to actually triumph. Now, he didn't have a solution as to where those economic circumstances or those economic changes were going to come from. He wasn't a socialist in the way we think of a socialist today. He wasn't
Yep.
that person.
No,
It
he was it was capitalism,
was
right? In
capitalism,
its
right?
rawest, purest form.
Right,
Right, is to do trade. And, you can start at small, trade some
right.
candlesticks for, machinery, who
Right,
knows, right?
or build a factory in a town that pays
Exactly,
people more than
exactly.
like 3 cents.
But
Okay,
but you do have to start with that Maslow's pyramid of needs, is you
you do.
have to first start with just giving people the basics,
Correct.
food, housing, clean water,
Right, exactly. Exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, the filth of these that is described
Yeah,
in here. Again, shocking conditions, right, to
yeah,
someone reading this book in our time. Hugo, though, while he held these in tension, ultimately was an optimist. I love the line that he said on
yeah.
August 3rd in his last public address, talking about the 20th century. He says, in the 20th century, war will be dead, the scaffold will be dead, hatred will be dead, frontier boundaries will be dead, dogmas will be dead, man will live. That's
Mm.
optimistic.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
optimistic. Now, he was if we look at the 20th century just in aggregate, he was not correct. Dogmas did survive because they're going
Yep,
to, because you can't kill an idea.
yep.
The scaffold not only is not dead, the scaffold is used for a whole variety of different things that Hugo would find abominable, I think. Hatred will be dead. Well, there's 100 million dead people from communism that would probably have
Yep.
something to say about that. Frontier boundaries will be dead. He's absolutely true about that. We, with the internet, we have pushed the frontier boundaries. Who's absolutely correct about that. War will be dead. No, war is a condition of the human heart. And as long as there are human beings who want to take stuff that other human beings have, we're going to have all of this. But saying of all that, but Hugo was optimistic. That's what romanticism is you. He was, well,
But if you compare, but on a relative basis,
yeah,
like it's been periods of less war and less death
yes,
as we had more economic prosperity
yes,
move throughout across the globe.
yes. Oh, yeah,
So there's a pragmatic, and there's also some sort of expectation that has been set somewhere that there isn't going to be tragedy in life. Like life
right.
isn't going to be easy, and that's that false promise that
Mm-hmm.
people give. Like it's about your ability to weather downturns and still be
Yes,
positive and look at the how to turn them into something that you can work with, as opposed to allowing it to bring you down.
yeah,
Like there's always
yeah,
going to be tragedy,
right,
but there's also going to be love, and there's also going to be, happiness and goodness too. It's your
yep.
choice on if you're going to allow the tragedy to weight you down, or to just find a way to move through it.
Right, exactly. And that's where Cassette really becomes an interesting character
Right,
as we
exactly.
turn on this.
Yep.
So we're not going to cover the whole book today. We're not going to get anywhere close. So I want to pause there on that thought, because I was going to do another section, but I think I want to summarize here and wrap up Libby's been very gracious to us with her time. And she's, like I said before at the beginning, she's a little jet lagged. So I want to give her the opportunity to go catch some Z's. And I think we've covered a lot of waterfront here with what Hugo is doing and what the book is doing. I strongly recommend you go out, you pick up Les Misérables. The Signet Classics unabridged version, which is the version I have, is 1,459 pages long. That's 1,459 pages. So it will take you a year, probably, if depending upon how fast a reader you are, to go through it, but it will not be a waste of your time. It will be amazing. And by the way, then you'll go and see the musical and you'll go watch the movie, and these things will be a lot more resonant for you, as it was for me. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying this. I was at a kid's recital. Well, not a kid's recital. I was at a recital. So my children go to music school, right? Because we homeschool our kids and we want to give them music. We send them to a local music school, and we have one in our town. It's great. I'm glad we have it. And I'm more than happy to give them my $300 a month for my two kids to go learn music. And ever so often they'll have recitals. So they have one in the spring, they have one in the summer, and they have one in the fall. Okay. And most recitals are okay. They're fine. It's like going to think of every kid's recital you've ever been to at a public school. It's kind of like that. If you have nieces or nephews or cousins, or you've ever been invited to one, you'll know what I'm talking about. And there are people at all kinds of different talent levels at this school doing all kinds of different instruments, playing all kinds of different instruments. And they teach everybody. They even have like a baby toddler class, right? Like a little Beethoven class, all the way up to 70, 80, 90-year-old people going and taking guitar lessons and learning how to play Smoke on the Water and stuff because they always wanted to do it. Okay. So at this recital, there were about, 25 people that were performing at the recital. And again, kind of all over the map, right? And the last lady, the second to the last lady who performed, this woman was probably in her 60s. And she came up and she did her instrument is her voice. And so she came up and she sang the song from Les Mis, I Have Dreamed a Dream. And I was not expecting this at all. This was totally like, oh, this is out of the blue. And so I was listening to her song, and I sent myself an email because I made a note about this because it opened up a door in my head as she was singing, and having read the book and having, knowing I was going to come on the podcast with Libby today and knowing we were going to be talking about this, it kind of opened up a door in my head. And the epiphany that I had was this. I'm going to just read it directly. Unlike contemporary social reformers, I want to close with this idea. Hugo saw the ability to be heroic despite your circumstances, whether that was poverty or gender or ethnicity. Wallace and Ben-Hur observed the same thing in people. This is the spot where Ben-Hur and Les Mis cross over. And it is a real shame, I think, that the theophany that overwhelms that point in Ben-Hur and the social reform message that overwhelms the point in Les Misérables have blinded people to that larger idea, the idea that you can be heroic despite your circumstances. The theater and film adaptations of Les Misérables, I think, miss this point as well. But we as leaders cannot miss this point, coming out of the chaos of the fourth turning into the next social, cultural, and economic high in the West. We are looking for heroes. We are entering an age of heroes, I think, but we must defeat the forces of vulgarity and commonness and banality. We have to overcome our circumstances. And those forces do have a head start. They really do. And they insist on themselves. I mean, we saw this in the mayoral election in LA. We see this in our public life all the time. But we must be heroic. And I think this is the larger message from Les Mis and the larger message from the books we covered this month on the show. We must be heroic in spite of our circumstances, not because of them and not in opposition to them, but in spite of them. And this is the thing that unlocked in my head when I saw that woman heroically belt out, I have dreamed a dream. And it absolutely blew me away. I mean, my wife was going to cry when she was sitting there. The woman hit, and then here's the end of that story. Here's the close of that. She walked off the stage, they gave them all little medals for performing. She got her little medal. She walked off the stage. She walked out. I didn't even see that woman in the parking lot. I didn't see that woman in the lobby afterward. That woman dropped the mic and beat the street. She was out. Stunning performance. Absolutely amazing and heroic.
Was she real?
If she wasn't real, I would have had to make her up.
Yeah.
um,
That's great.
Final thoughts, Libby, as we close.
Oh, I think I can't beat anything that you've just said. I mean, it's just beautiful, right? Just,
Yeah, it was heroism. This is what we need. We need more heroism, and everybody has the opportunity to be a hero. Everybody does.
everyone has the opportunity to continue to evolve and to grow into better versions of themselves. And as you do that, you're modeling, you know, virtuousness to the rest of the world. So it's in our small moments every single day that we give hope to others, whether it's acknowledged
Right.
or not.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the story.
That's the story. Well, we will have Libby back. We will. I want to talk about cassette. I want to talk about what happens with the barricades and the back end of Les Mis. We will revisit this. This is going to be one of those books. Or Count of Monte Cristo. They're on, not probably a little bit later on this year. So once again, I would like to thank Libby Unger for coming on our show today.
Thank you.
And with that, well,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. We're out.